Episode 1 begins near the Shimagama Shrine in the Tadasu no Mori Forest in the triangular area surrounded by the Takano and Kama rivers, and there's a real place in Kyoto, Japan that you can visit as the events of Tatami Galaxy take place in real-life Kyoto University because Tomohiko Morimi, the author of the novel this anime is based on, graduated from Kyoto University, and thus many of his stories take place in Kyoto, including Tatami Galaxy. And so episode 1 begins near the Shimagama Shrine, but more specifically it begins at a ramen cart, and a mysterious ramen cart known as the Neko ramen cart now being cat because rumored to use actual cats to make the product, but the taste of ramen is unmatched. The location of the Neko ramen cart is a recurring motif in Tatami Galaxy, and almost every main character makes an appearance at least once. Here we meet the unnamed main character, who we will refer to as Watashi or I/me in Japanese, and we also meet a mysterious character who introduces himself first as and then a second time as The mysterious character claims to be the god of matchmaking, that he will match someone named Akashi to either Watashi or Ozu. He invites Watashi to learn room 210 of Shimagama Yusui-so, which is coincidentally the apartment building where Watashi already lives, as this mysterious god apparently lives in a room just a floor above him. And so anyways, every episode begins with Watashi lamenting about how in high school he didn't participate in any club activities and just stayed cooped up with a bunch of other layabout guys, but now as a brand spanking new freshman university student, he's ready to experience the extremely mythical and he also can't wait to finally meet a beautiful and basically he just wants his college life to be perfect, but in reality it isn't going to happen. So anyways, every episode begins with Watashi joining a club, and the very first club that Watashi joins in the very first episode is the tennis circle. Watashi tries to make friends, he doesn't, because socializing is hard, and who isn't able to relate to that? To fall behind in social conventions, not click with certain types of people, or many types of people, and consequently feel like an outcast. In circumstances like these, we wish to find just one meaningful connection, to find that one person who, unlike everybody else, truly understands you and shares the same harmonious wavelengths, a special person who can only be tied to you by the black thread of fate, and Watashi does meet this type of person. And it's not a raven-haired maiden.
But the
Ozu, the root of all evil, the bane of Watashi's existence, the cause of all his problems. Watashi spends much of the series bemoaning Ozu and blaming Ozu for ruining his college life. He constantly belittles Ozu and accuses him of being the worst type of person imaginable, going so far as to always characterize Ozu as having yokai eyes, as if to register him as inhuman. The demonization, in fact, is almost cartoonish, especially when you consider how all characters in the show have the same type of eyes, except for Ozu. In fact, in episode 7, during one of the first scenes to occur outside of Watashi's perspective, we see Ozu, and he has normal eyes. Up until that point, in every other scene Ozu appears in, he's always in the presence of Watashi, and is thus depicted as having yokai eyes. This leads the viewer to question the reliability of Watashi's narrative. Can such an offensive caricature of a person actually exist? Can one person really be the cause of all your problems? An interesting thing to note is that throughout Watashi's constant berating of Ozu, Ozu never really objects to it, other than, well, saying, whatever comments he does give are usually rather nonchalant, and also usually ignored by Watashi. And for the most part, whenever Watashi and Ozu are actually together, Ozu is mostly only an observer to Watashi's actions, simply playing along with whatever silly idea Watashi has next. We never really get to hear Ozu's actual perspective on Watashi's lamentings, because the audience is always locked into only Watashi's perspective, into only what Watashi wants us to see. Because, in my opinion, Watashi's most damning weakness, which he gradually overcomes, is his stubborn refusal to look beyond his own myopic lens of reality, to only focus on what he wants to think is making him unhappy. As a result, Ozu feels less like a real person and more like a product of Watashi projecting his own dissatisfaction and worse thoughts about himself onto another innocent person. But if you ask me what I think Ozu truly represents, I think Ozu is a manifestation of Watashi's deepest, most heartfelt, and secret desire that he'll never openly admit to anyone, or even himself. To have someone so obsessed with you as to deliberately cause misfortune upon you, and to have someone so consistently taking part with you in whatever adventure or wacky hijink your campus life brings, because the notable thing about Watashi's interactions with Ozu is, despite spending so much time trash-talking Ozu, beyond words, Watashi offers very little actual resistance to Ozu's presence. They curiously still do everything together. And so the only person who loyally stays by Watashi's side through each colorful, whimsical episode, the only person who goes out of their way to willfully insert themselves into Watashi's life, that only person is Ozu. And to me, there is no greater undying love than that. And who wouldn't want that? And so it's heartwarming to see that by the end of the series, instead of projecting this desire onto some fantasy version of Ozu, Watashi willingly provides what he wants for the real Ozu, because Watashi finally learns to take action for himself. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go back to Watashi hating Ozu.
夜道で会えば10人中8人は妖怪と間違え、妖怪に騙されたのは妖怪のような顔をして、妖怪ぬらりひょんと妖怪と見まごうとはよほど心のねじ曲がった人間の見識か。不幸にしてシャンバイクを止めるべきところが一つもない男だ。彼で会わなければきっと私の魂はもっと清らかだったであろう。うるさい！お前のせいで有意義な学生生活が台無しになってしまった！でなければこの2年間を棒に振ることもなかった。
あらら、それはお互い様じゃありませんか。どうせあなたはどんな道を選んだって今みたいなありさまになっちまうんですから。
But yeah, Watashi and Ozu seem to do a lot of things together. For example, in the tennis circle, Watashi can't find love, and so his idea of fun is to ruin it for everybody else by performing mischievous acts of tomfoolery with Ozu to sabotage any forming relationships between men and women and become notoriously known as the Black Cupids. An interesting thing to note is how Watashi is shown intentionally cutting away the red threads of fate. This derives from a common East Asian belief that two destined lovers will be tied together by an invisible red cord, one of the most popular depictions in anime being the red hair tie from Makoto Shinkai's Kimi no Na wa. And so Watashi is obsessed with hacking away these red threads of fate, which is especially interesting when we consider how Ozu describes his bond with Watashi. And so Watashi and Ozu do anything they can to ruthlessly split up couples and sever the ties of love, and they do this because they're the clear-eyed prophets who have endured the pains of loneliness and isolation, and thus they have become enlightened by the fruitlessness of love and the unhappiness it doth wrought. And so it is only their moral duty to bring down the hammer of truth upon the unsuspecting public and squash flat the bile that is a budding romance. Either that, or they're just assholes. But either way, their antics set the tone for the series, introducing a central theme of loneliness and isolation, and it also leads to one of my favorite animated sequences of the first episode, when Watashi and Ozu set off a showering pour of glittery, glowing fireworks upon a crowd of innocent bystanders. And then we get my literal favorite shot of the series, when Akashi leans against a tree sipping tea while the fireworks explode around her. Anyways, every episode usually has Watashi joining some club, but then every episode also has Watashi becoming frustrated while participating inside a club, after which at some point Watashi runs off to Kiyamachi. To walk one's life as now, ever unchanging, is a most aptly worded omen given the cyclic episodic structure of Tatami Galaxy, where Watashi continually lives his college life over and over again, doomed to relive the same misfortunes, the same egocentric grievances, and the same bitter regrets. While each time he does make small subtle differences in his decisions, they ultimately always lead to the same result, as if to imply that the events and characters who appear in our lives are often beyond our control, and the only thing really within our control is our perception of what currently lies before us. Anyways, after giving this omen, the old lady will charge Watashi an increasing amount of yen each episode.
はい、1000円。まだ何も解決してないのに。はい、2000円。
値上がりしてませんか？
はい、3000円。また値上がりっていうか早。はい、4000円。
どんどんはしょられてませんか？
はい、5000円。
え？
はい、6000円。
何も答えが出ていません。
はい、7000円。
おい、何をする？
はい、9000円。
大台に近い。
Later in episode 1, Watashi and Ozu have dinner, where Ozu asks Watashi what he thinks about Akashi. Akashi, the girl mentioned by at the beginning of the episode. Akashi, the girl coolly sipping tea while leaning against a tree amidst the fireworks explosions. Akashi, the girl who Ozu describes as the only person besides Ozu who was unfortunate enough to be able to comprehend a person such as Watashi. I think this is a most endearing way to describe Akashi's relationship to Watashi. Of all characteristics to highlight, the ability to comprehend someone, to understand someone's mental patterns and accept their idiosyncrasies. To me, this quality is most intimate and romantic. Throughout the series, we see several instances where Akashi comprehends Watashi, and also vice versa. Watashi repeatedly describes that when he first meets Akashi, she is often initially perceived by others to be cold and chilly. But even so, Watashi would cheer her on from a distance, encouraging her to keep doing things her own way. Similarly, throughout every episode, you can sense a subtle, unyielding loyalty Akashi has to Watashi despite all his antics and shortcomings. A loyalty that, just like Akashi, is never blatant or spoken outright, and instead only hinted at through passing comments and specific decisions. And it is a loyalty that I personally find absolutely lovable, and can only be achieved through cogent and thoughtful comprehension. One thing I can't help but wonder is why Akashi, a girl with a very dignified and aloof appearance, would choose to associate herself with such an oddball crew between Watashi, Ozu, and her quick irritation with others is in blunt contrast to her curious tolerance of this group's nonsense, going so far as to willingly be the third disciple in this motley gang of fools. All this seems to point to a softened and perhaps delightfully weird interior to her character beyond her icy exterior. Like, maybe Akashi is a girl who sees through the pretenses put on by others and simply wants to have fun with her friends and enjoy the absurdities life has to offer. Absurdities. Tatami Galaxy is a series abundantly rich with the absurd. There are numerous scenarios and student organizations on Watashi's campus that are exaggerated forms of reality. Meeting the god of matchmaking at a ramen cart rumored to use cats in its broth, or Jougasaki's dog Kaori and also his boob wall, or a secret society with the militant library police and a stolen bicycle black market, and an ongoing war of pranks across multiple generations called the masochistic Proxy War, and a softball club that turns out to be selling medicinal jellies that turns out to be a doomsday cult complete with Ark of Salvation. And lastly, just the premise of Watashi being stuck in an endless maze of 4.5 tatami rooms that each represent him living the same life over and over again across many different realities. Well, these are all elements of the absurd. And a story so richly dense with the absurd seems to signify that the world we live in is so unpredictable and weird, it's outside of our control. And yet these elements of the absurd are all exactly what give Tatami Galaxy its unique charm. To me, the main takeaway I got from Tatami Galaxy is that while life may sometimes be absurd and we may feel like we were dealt with an unfair hand, instead of scoffing at the absurd or rejecting it like Watashi does for much of this series, we should learn to appreciate the wondrously rich and unique experiences it has to offer. And that's why Tatami Galaxy is so fun to watch, because it's absurd. The absurd events of Tatami Galaxy are made believable by utilizing the medium of animation, because absurdism is about stretching reality to its most outlandish yet plausible limits, and sometimes this is just physically impossible to do except with animation. And anime director Masaki Yuasa further embraces the absurd with his looser, more bare-bones animation style. The malleability and freeform nature of Masaki Yuasa's characters in not just Tatami Galaxy, but many of his other directorial works as well, it allows them to both physically and ideologically fill whatever imagined and expansive reality Yuasa wants to envision. The character designs of Masaki Yuasa's works are always very distinctive because they aren't bound by the rules most typical anime have to follow, because Masaki Yuasa loves to tap into the absurd. And learning to appreciate the absurd provides a whole new lens through which we can experience its underlying reality. In episode 4, the quest for the miraculous tortoise brush is a key example of Watashi coming face to face with the absurd. A tortoise brush with unparalleled cleaning prowess is absurd. The fact that it costs 100,000 yen, or almost $1,000, is absurd. The fact that Watashi finds a backpack with precisely that amount of money and also actually finds the rare tortoise brush, it's all absurd. And obviously Watashi points out that the practical thing to do would be to run off with the money and not pay for some useless, overpriced tortoise brush. Except he doesn't. Despite how absurd it seems, he still buys the expensive tortoise brush for and that makes for a far more interesting story to tell. And also, the person who helped Watashi along the way was Akashi, because the whole point I started talking about all this in the first place is that Despite her stern demeanor, Akashi probably has an underlying respect for the absurd, and is thus willing to participate in these odd adventures, and that makes her a wonderful character. And so anyways, going all the way back to Watashi's dinner with Ozu in episode 1, Ozu says that Watashi should ask Akashi out on a date, to which Watashi says that he would much rather have a beautiful raven-haired maiden who makes you go ho-ha ho-ha than someone who is able to comprehend a person such as himself. And to that I say, wow, what is wrong with you? Are you blind? Akashi is literally a beautiful raven-haired maiden. She is wonderful. How can you not see? And bleh. Thankfully, Watashi has 11 episodes to eventually learn the error of his ways. Ozu says he prays for Watashi to succeed with Akashi, after which Watashi tells Ozu to shut up, and that it's thanks to Ozu that he wasted his perfectly lovely college life. To which Ozu says,
どうせあなたはどんな道を選んだって今みたいなありさまになっちまうんですから。
Here we have Ozu serving Watashi a cold dish of hard-hitting truth. It doesn't matter what club Watashi chose, which girl he met, which friends he avoided, or whatever other hypothetical decision he could have lamentably made. His regrets and unhappiness will remain unchanged if he continues to look for something that simply isn't there. Later, Watashi comes home to his apartment to find Ozu sitting there, and Ozu has a gift for him, a Castella Cake. The Castella Cake is one of the most recurring motifs in Tatami Galaxy, and Watashi receives it several times as a gift from multiple characters.
どうせあいつはまたこの下宿にいるという師匠のところへでも訪ねてきたんだろう。このカステラもその余り物に違いない。下宿に戻ると先日オズにもらったカステラが何者かによって食い散らかされていた。好物はエチルアルコールとカステラで酔うと人の顔を舐める癖がある。
今後ともよろしくお願いします。
明石です。師匠からカステラの差し入れ持ってきました。
カステラやるから添い寝して。
強行であった。隣の四畳半にも魚肉ハンバーグとカステラがあった。カステラによって得られる栄養分は無視できない。これは先日2階の住人の部屋に出入りするオズという人間からもらったものである。ほとんどすべての私の部屋にカステラを運ぶ男。
To me, the Castella Cake represents a constant token of friendship across all realities Watashi lives. In a way, it's a beacon of light that literally helps him survive throughout the endless 4.5 Tatami maze. But the Castella Cake is also significant in that
大きなカステラを一人で食べるというのは孤独の極致ですからね。
このままオズと明石さんが年頃になるようなことがあれば私一人の人恋しさの問題ではない。明石さんの将来に関わることだ。私の理性までがカステラのようにボロボロ崩れていくかに思えた。思えばこの2年奴は散々私をおかずとしてうまい飯をむさぼり食ってきたに違いない。万死に値する男だ。コーヒー引きにかけて粉々にしてやる。
loneliness, isolation, the bitter pain of feeling unable to meaningfully connect with others or live so-called fulfilling experiences, and to consequently become disinterested in the outside world. One thing I have to give Tatami Galaxy is that it depicts one of the loneliest experiences I've ever seen in an anime. You can really sense the bitterness and indignation Watashi feels with the outside world that causes him to lose all faith in humanity and retreat into his 4.5 Tatami room. The poignance of his isolation is then made only more acute by his pitiful acceptance of it. When Watashi gobbles up and animalistically devours the Castella Cake, he is embracing his quiet damnation with tragic gusto. His climactic fate tumbling through an endless maze of 4.5 Tatami rooms is an eventual conclusion of a characteristic fall into depression. Watashi has become so engrossed in wanting to live the rose-colored campus life and meet a raven-haired maiden that any other experience has become colorless. He entraps himself into an endlessly recurring sequence of 4.5 Tatami rooms because it is a perfect metaphor for a self-affirming reality. Watashi hyper-focuses on only his failures and misfortunes, and so, in an attempt to make sense of a world where disappointment is seemingly endlessly reoccurring, he literally constructs a new reality to reflect that view. He stubbornly refuses to acknowledge that his life was actually filled with wondrously rich experiences and opportunities, and isolates his perceptions into a world that is actually small, cramped, and filled with nothing. When told that there's nothing lonelier than eating a Castella Cake by yourself, rather than avoid this ominous omen, he fully accepts his fate, and purposely eats a Castella Cake by himself. He'll blame the world, persecute all of society, and especially Ozu, and never take any personal responsibility and blame everybody except himself, when really he is the only one choosing to eat the Castella by himself. Will Watashi ever escape this debilitating cycle? Or will he be doomed to forever walk this life as now, ever unchanging? Later, Watashi arrives in Kamo-Ohashi, where the residents of Kyoto are celebrating Gozan, a summer festival that actually takes place in real-life Kyoto every year on August 16th, when 5 giant bonfires are lit on mountains surrounding the city, including the Dai character, meaning large or great, shown here on Mount Daimonji. Watashi meets Akashi, intending to maybe ask her out, but he freezes up and can't do it. How unfortunate, how sad, another missed opportunity to meaningfully connect. Perhaps he's doomed to eternal loneliness. And that's when Ozu calls out to him, cross-dressing as a woman for some reason, and he yells out for Watashi to walk along the path of love. And he's also surrounded by an angry mob, who then throws Ozu into the dangerously raging river, at which Watashi runs past the crowd to inspect. Then the crowd suspects Watashi of being an accomplice. As Akashi and others look on, the crowd picks up Watashi and throws him off the bridge towards the river. And in the freeze rain before Watashi plunges perilously to his watery doom, let's lamentably look back on Watashi's supposedly wretched life, at the regrettable decisions he made, and the bewilderingly absurd characters he met, and how it all led to his current sorrowful state. Well, instead of looking back on a singular life, I suppose we should look back on plural lives, on hypothetical, infinitely many parallel universe lives all concurrently existing in a Tatami Galaxy. In episode 2, Watashi enrolls in the Misogi Film Club, where the phrase Misogi usually refers to the Shinto practice of meditating on a waterfall to cleanse the spirit. What that has to do with filmmaking, I'm not sure, but it does explain why followers of the couple shout the word Absurdism, which is associated with Misogi and the act of cleansing oneself. Why are they trying to cleanse? Good movies? I don't know. And in this club, we also meet Jougasaki, the president of the film club. Unlike Watashi, who makes movies with artistic integrity that result in appealing to only a niche audience, Jougasaki is shallow, perverse, and makes popular films filled with artificial fluff. He is also stupid, having flunked his classes multiple times, and is currently in his 8th year. On top of all this, he's a boob dictator, an obsession with boobs, holding auditions to measure girls' boobs, and he owns and climbs a boob wall. We later learn that Jougasaki, of all people, is a rival to while almost polar opposite people, with being a more laid-back, passive, go-with-the-flow type of person, and Jougasaki being a seemingly more active, broy, alpha male type of person. They do both share the dubious title of being perpetual undergraduates, and thus perhaps have a shared disdain for formal education, albeit maybe for different reasons. But also, despite wildly contrasting demeanors, they do share the same enthusiasm for the curious mysticisms of life. Anyways, Watashi is incensed that such a boorish man like this gets to helm the club's most popular films and hold the respect of all the club members, and thus Watashi becomes motivated to create a most libellous expose film about Jougasaki. Expose films are another recurring theme in Tatami Galaxy, although in other timelines, instead of Watashi making the film, it's usually mentioned that Ozu makes the expose films on Jougasaki and his right-hand man, Aijima Senpai, due to his role in a Proxy war and also in his clan for power, which we'll talk about later. But the main reveal of the expose film on Jougasaki is that, beyond capturing his most embarrassing and humiliating moments, most appallingly, it unveils Jougasaki's darkest secret of all. Jougasaki has a sex doll. Or, to be fair, we don't actually know if it's a sex doll, because as Ozu often puts it,
非常に高尚な愛の形です。
これは高尚な趣味である。私はきっと香織さんを清らかに愛しきれない。これはやはり凡人には踏み入れられない領域なのだ。
It's very weird, but if I had to give some semblance of an explanation as to why Jougasaki has a maybe or maybe not sex doll for a girlfriend, it might be that Kaori the doll represents the lofty ideals Watashi can never hope to attain, like how if one hopes to attain a raven-haired maiden, it would have to be an actual non-human doll. Or maybe it's that a recurring theme of Tatami Galaxy seems to be that life can be very weird, but what's most important isn't what other people think, but instead that you are happy living it. If even Jougasaki can perceive happiness in his absurd romantic situation, then why can't Watashi find happiness in his own life? In episode 3, Watashi joins the cycling club Soleil, spending 2 years designing and buying parts to create the most perfect aerodynamic bicycle. But then the day before he can enter the Shimanami Cup, his bike is cruelly stolen by the Cherry Cycle Cleanup Corps, a mysterious organization rumored to use stolen bikes to maintain shady influences across Japan. Distraught at the loss of the bike he worked so hard on, Watashi stubbornly refuses to give up and still rides in the race on his old bike Manami, but fails miserably, and understandably he begins to question the purpose of the past 2 years of his life, as it seems to have been all for naught. And then even more distressingly, after the race is finished, Watashi sees that the victor of the race was using his stolen bike, and that victor was Later, after Watashi's biking failure, Akashi enrolls Watashi into the Birdman Circle, hoping that he could pilot their plane in the Birdman contest. It's interesting how in this episode the cycling club is named Soleil, which means sun, and the episode likens Watashi's over-idealistic ambitions by making a reference to Icarus, someone who flew too close to the sun, and also says that the Birdman's goal of making man fly is absurd in itself. Akashi states that she chose Watashi as a candidate to be the pilot because she thought the pilot should be a person with a soul charred by idleness and wasted passion, someone who could expend an incredible waste of energy, as only someone like that could fit the absurd goal of Birdman. I think Akashi's comments illustrates precisely why the audience finds Watashi enjoyable to watch as a character. He has an admirable determination towards his goals in spite of his hapless circumstances. When ousted from a tennis club, he will ruthlessly tear apart romantic relationships. When ousted from a movie club, he will contrive an elaborate and damning expose film on his adversary. When his bike gets stolen, he still defiantly races even on a defective bike. He'll rise through the ranks of a honeybee cult. He'll claw his ways to get rich in a secret society. He has an extremely stubborn willingness to achieve his goals, misguided as they may sometimes be. It is then no wonder that Watashi almost has a superiority complex, to almost feel like he is owed something for his efforts but is wrongfully denied. And it's also no wonder that, given the extent of his efforts, Watashi would feel utmost despair and the bitterest regret upon not reaching his goals, and consequently lock himself into his 4.5 tatami room. I think it's quite common for people to believe that they are not living to their fullest potential, to feel like they have instead been put in an unjust situation. We want to believe that we're talented and smart and that we deserve more, and we might sense that because we could genuinely be working really hard towards something. But blaming everything on Ozu helps us rationalize our situation and cope with our failure, as opposed to re-evaluating what we've been working so desperately towards in the first place. When Watashi checks on the airplane shortly before the competition, he sees that the plane is about to be stolen by the Cheery Cycle Cleanup Corps, and they're being led by someone wearing a trench coat. And that person is Ozu? Is Ozu attempting to sabotage Watashi's plans? Why is he always getting in the way? Clearly, Ozu is the one who must be blamed for all of Watashi's problems. Every misfortune Watashi ever had was always due to Ozu, and never due to himself. In episode 4, Watashi, Ozu, and Akashi all become disciples of a character whose tongue twister of a fake name I'm not going to show again because his actual name is Higuchi Seitarou. Higuchi is referred to several times as a master and is visited by Ozu and Akashi frequently throughout the series. But why is he called a master? What is he a master of? Nothing. He's a master of nothing. He's a bum. Honestly, I have some serious logistical questions when it comes to Higuchi's academic situation. It says he's been a student for 8 years, and I'm wondering, how does he pay for tuition? How does he pay for rent? Don't tell me this vagrant has a job! Even Watashi admits to not really knowing what exactly he's a disciple of or why he remains a follower of Higuchi. I feel like Higuchi, as a person, is an embodiment of absurdity. His anachronistic manner of speaking and traditional dress is absurd. His fake name is absurd. The fact that he won a race on Watashi's stolen bike, or that he has long overdue library books, and also a little tortoise brush fetch quest he set Watashi on, is all absurd. And also the fact that he almost certainly is smoking weed in this scene is, well, that's pretty normal. But for 2010 Japan, that is absurd. And I feel like Higuchi's strong relationship with absurdity gives him an air of divinity, because an association with the absurd is almost like a separation from the regular material world. And I think like a lot of Buddhism is about trying to separate oneself from the material world. Higuchi doesn't care about everyday normal people things, which is why he doesn't care about school. And I think it's no coincidence that Buddhism is very much about trying to break out of a karmic cycle of reliving one's material life over and over again, and perhaps trying to gain a wisdom akin to Higuchi's is the key Watashi needs to break out of his own vicious cycle of reliving his own wretched life over and over again. And just like how many Asian deities have exaggerated body parts like large noses or ears, Higuchi has a really large chin. Anyways, that might all be a stretch, but I do think that Higuchi is seen as wise because he very much chooses to enjoy the world as it is and all the absurdity it has to offer. Some of the most poignant advice Higuchi gives to Akashi occurs in episode 9, telling him that if you keep focusing your gaze on that which is unrealistic, you never will achieve that goal. The root of all your evil is in always relying on one of your other possibilities to get your wish. You must accept that you are the person here, now, and that you cannot become anyone else other than that person. And then he says plainly that there is no such thing as that rose-colored campus life, that there is nothing rose-colored in this world, and that everything is rather all a bunch of colors mixed up. And that's basically the point of the whole show. When he's not giving advice, Higuchi is often seen lying about reading a book, and more specifically, he is reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea written by Jules Verne. And this book seems to be a prominent motif in the series. I think the reference to 20,000 Leagues coincides with Higuchi's desire to see the world, as much of that book is dedicated to exploration and finding excitement in the world's plentiful mysteries. And this is a goal Higuchi eventually achieves, finding his trip with the prize money he got from winning the Shimanami Cup on Watashi's stolen bike. But I think that 20,000 Leagues is also referenced because, in the book, one of the main characters, Captain Nemo, spent many of the years exploring the world all by himself in his submarine. And I think that, like Watashi, he must have felt a very lonely experience being so isolated from the rest of humanity. Another interesting aspect of Higuchi's life is his ongoing role in the masochistic Proxy war. This curiously named war is first foreshadowed in one of Watashi's student films as an ongoing conflict for generations over the tiniest, stupidest things possible, and namely always between only two destined parties. And of all people, Higuchi is involved in this war with Jougasaki, the president of the film club, and as it is only the preordained right, the two execute a series of mischievous and borderline malevolent pranks against each other, and they've decided to involve both Watashi and Ozu in their mess, with Higuchi and Jougasaki choosing Watashi and Ozu respectively to take on the burden of resuming their war. To me, the Proxy war represents an eternal, pointless, and absurd struggle. It's like Sisyphus, except it involves two people, which I guess is more fun. And maybe that's the point. Like life, it's better not to look too much into it and just have fun. In episode 5, Watashi joins the Honwaka softball circle. It seems to be a regular softball club, with a honeybee theme going on, and that honeybee theme seems to stem from the fact that the club has a side hustle of also selling jellies and other health products from, well, the Honwaka Corporation. The corporation has very unsettling cult-like practices, and a floating blimp arc of salvation will fly upon the impending end of humanity? What kind of baseball club is this? An interesting scene in this episode is where the cult instructs its members to lay bare their souls and spill out any emotions festering deep in their hearts, and that this is the only way they can be happy and healthy, and all are able to comply except Watashi. Watashi seems to differ from others due to his very individualistic conviction. He won't fall for these manipulative tactics that create an entrapping sense of belonging by taking advantage of people who feel lonely. He won't appeal to the masses like Jougasaki's crude films. Even with the end of the world on the line, Watashi will stand up for only what he believes in, even to a fault. But maybe they have a point. Maybe Watashi should be more honest to himself. In fact, Watashi does have an opportunity to literally speak with himself at the end of the episode when an alternate version of himself peers into his Tatami room from behind the Honwaka jelly boxes. This alternate version of himself possesses a beard and a pitiful strain in his fearful cries, as we later learn this other version of Watashi has been wandering lost for months in an endless Tatami maze, and is in desperate need of guidance and reason. But rather than confront himself, Watashi thoroughly rejects his phantom presence by frantically blocking up the entryway through which his other self came. He refuses to accept his demise, yet he also refuses to change his course. He feels his only options are to either turn back time or to suffer the same tragic fate this specter has brought. And once again, Watashi does not learn, and we are led to the triple trifecta of episodes 6, 7, and 8, where Watashi joins 3 different clubs, the English-speaking club, the superhero club, and the reading club. And not only does Watashi get caught up in 3 different clubs, but he also gets caught up with 3 different women. At the English-speaking club, he becomes friendly with Hanuki, a character who has appeared a few times throughout the series until now. She's a dental hygienist who's in the same class as Higuchi, Jougasaki, and Neko Ramen cart owner. She is also implied to be Higuchi's girlfriend, but Higuchi often neglects her, which understandably upsets her. And lastly, Hanuki finally warms up enough to Watashi to ask him to get drinks one-on-one, which is something she only does with people she's closest to. And that's all cool, except Watashi is already involved with 2 other girls. The second girl in this triangle is utterly bizarre. Watashi's fallen for Jougasaki's doll, Kaori. This is the doll we saw earlier in Jougasaki's expose film. In episodes 6 through 8, Jougasaki entrusts Kaori to Watashi's care, presumably because he wants to protect her from the Proxy war, although in a separate timeline in episode 9 we see that the Lucky Cat restaurant has also been going after Kaori. It's a little bit interesting how we have somewhat of 2 different factions going on between students associated with the Neko Ramen cart and then the Lucky Cat restaurant. They're both culinary establishments associated with cats, albeit one with Japanese food and the other with apparently Chinese food, perhaps insinuating an antithetical relationship between the two. One group seems to be tyrannical and oppressive, overseeing many shady operations to maintain restrictive control over the campus, while the other group is more free-spirited, wandering about wherever they please, licking whoever they please, and becoming romantically involved with whatever doll they please. Anyways, the third girl in this triangle is probably the most interesting of them all. She's a mysterious girl without a face called Keiko Higuchi who has been upholding a pen pal relationship with Watashi for the past 2 years. Watashi randomly started talking to her when he found her name and address in a book, which happens to be The Night is Short, Walk On Girl, another book written by Tomohiko Mori that was also adapted in an anime directed by Masaki Yuasa. The fact she shares the same surname with Seitarou Higuchi is quite interesting, but this will make more sense once we learn the true identity of Keiko Higuchi. Watashi has become absolutely enamored with Keiko, but is also dreadfully fearful that he has created such an embellished version of himself in his letters that she can't possibly like him when they meet. Hence why he has pushed off meeting her for over 2 years, telling himself he can't do so until he finally becomes this impossible, greatly exaggerated version of himself that he can't realistically hope to achieve. And so all this points to Watashi's painfully isolating disconnect with reality. He has unrealistic expectations for this girl he doesn't even know and who might not even exist, and even more concerningly, he has unrealistic expectations for himself. He has become so focused on this more handsome, more interesting, more successful, fictionalized version of himself that he has become dissatisfied with who he actually is. He doesn't think he's good enough to date, and he still wants the most ideal girl possible. And even more so, he lets his problem worsen because he insists that it's more romantic to never meet the girl you write letters to in order to uphold the excitement and possibility that is inherent to sustaining the unknown. Because Watashi refuses to see Keiko for who she really is, he fixates on only his own perspectives, pigeonholing himself and projecting his wants without constraint until they blow out of proportion. Watashi is trapped in his inner world, and he needs to get out. And unfortunately, none of these three women present a viable option for escape. During each of episodes 6, 7, and 8, Watashi has these situations with Hanuki, Kaori, and Keiko. On the night Hanuki finally invites Watashi to drinks, it's also coincidentally the last night he has with Kaori before Jougasaki retrieves her from him. And it's also when Keiko Higuchi grants Watashi with an ultimatum that this is the last chance he'll ever have to meet her. When Watashi initially goes to see Hanuki, he sees she's already with Jougasaki, after which he defeats Jougasaki in a drinking battle, and then Hanuki and Watashi drunkenly stumble into Hanuki's apartment, where Hanuki starts licking Watashi because apparently that's something drunk people do. And then in a panic, Watashi will lock himself in the bathroom, finding himself at a critical junction point where he must make a decision amongst three different girls. During this sequence of events, we're also introduced to a new character, an abstract character who lives inside Watashi's mind, or somewhere else inside his body. This character is the cartoony cowboy lovingly referred to as Johnny. And Johnny seems to appear whenever Watashi is feeling particularly libidinous for some girl, and other times when Watashi is alone or feeling bored and magazines are shown on the floor and we'll see Johnny riding a horse in a hamster wheel and... What is that? What's that supposed to mean? It's supposed to mean playtime?
おいおい、これ 100% 後期到来じゃん。彼女の顔見てみろよ。待ってるぜ。逃げるな腰抜けが。わかった。俺が代わりにやってやる。何をする？来てよ。いけるぜ。いって。ヤッホー。なんでまっすぐ帰ってきちゃったんだ。いい感じだったじゃねえか。あのままデートに誘っちまえばよかったのに。ちぎれて飛んで生きてよ。
Anyways, each episode follows what would happen if Watashi chose each of the aforementioned three women, and the moral of the story seems to be that no matter which woman Watashi chose, he'll always miserably fail, never coming close to getting the girl he wanted, and Johnny will always be sad. Hanuki was meant for Higuchi, and Kaori was meant for Jougasaki, but the most intriguing failure Watashi faces has to be the case of Keiko Higuchi. For 2 years, Watashi has been writing letters to this girl, yet he doesn't even have any idea what she looks like, but he does know where he lives since there has to be an address he mails to. She lives in Jodoji, but for the sake of keeping it mystery, he does not wish to visit her there. The one time he does gain the courage to see where Keiko lives in Jodoji, he arrives dressed in a Mochiguman costume he lives with a superhero club, but he chickens out and leaves when he sees Akashi exiting the building, hinting at Keiko's true identity. Later in episode 8, Hanuki mentions to Watashi that Ozu also lives in Jodoji, which is most peculiar, so when Watashi finally decides to see Keiko Higuchi and goes to Jodoji, imagine the horror he must have felt when he saw Ozu exit the building where Keiko lived. What more sickening revelation could there be than to realize you've been exchanging love letters with your sworn enemy, someone with whom you associate every irredeemable trait possible and consider to be the lowliest scum, and the person you blame for ruining your college life? To trade Keiko, who Watashi has dreamt up to be the most perfect girl possible, for this demon child known as Ozu. This twisted love story is a condemnation worse than death. But let's talk about Keiko real quick. Keiko was indeed written to be the most perfect girl possible for Watashi because she was literally too good to be true. She's a fabrication only Ozu could make because only Ozu knew Watashi well enough to match a character to all his wants. And the only time a person can perfectly match all one's wants is in fiction. Keiko is represented as a girl with no face because she is too idealized to exist. But what's interesting is that this particular girl with no face has been used to represent other women in the series, and not just the imaginary Keiko Higuchi. The faceless girl is a personification of the raven-haired maiden Watashi dreams about in every episode. Whenever raven-haired maiden is mentioned, this faceless girl is used, and the beautiful irony is that in all these cases, the raven-haired maiden will melt into the grotesque face of Ozu, just like how Keiko is revealed to be Ozu. The raven-haired maiden, alongside the rose-colored campus life, is meant to represent the ultimate achievement for Watashi that is always just beyond his reach. She's not meant to be realistically attainable, and she's not meant to represent a real person. Except the raven-haired maiden does exist in a real person. In episode 5, we meet the daughter of the Honwaka Corporation president, a girl named Kohinata who is beautiful beyond words and who immediately captivates Watashi, motivating him to spend the next 2 years selling medicinal products just to get a glimpse of her for only a few seconds at the Honwaka National Assembly. 2 years of work just to get to see her for a few seconds and not even come remotely close to dating her. Fun fact, but Kohinata was actually first mentioned in the very first episode as someone who previously dumped Watashi. And just like Keiko, Higuchi, and the Raven-Haired Maiden, Kohinata is depicted in the show as the same faceless girl. And so basically, Kohinata, Keiko, Higuchi, and the Raven-Haired Maiden all together represent someone who Watashi wants but can't get, and maybe Watashi should just move on. It's not like anybody could actually capture the attention of this overly romanticized girl. Except someone did capture her attention. And that person is motherfucking Ozu. We learn in episode 5 that Ozu has stolen the airship from the Honwaka Corporation. Later in episode 6, we hear the first rumor of Ozu having a girlfriend in a conversation between Hanuki and Watashi. And finally, in episode 9, we learn that Ozu has stolen the airship because he wishes to pick up Kohinata in it so that he can see all 5 summits of the Gozan festival from the sky. It's an absurd, silly, and hopelessly romantic goal. Ozu, who assisted Watashi in denouncing love at the tennis circle in the first episode, the same tennis circle where he apparently met Kohinata. Ozu, who has constantly sabotaged Watashi at every turn and caused him to waste the past 2 years of his college life. Ozu, who, dressed as a woman, cheered for Watashi to walk upon the path of love. It is utterly ironic that, of all people, Ozu is the object of Kohinata's affection. We have become so accustomed to Watashi demonizing Ozu that it would be perfectly natural for us to assume that Ozu was incapable of any human emotions, and especially love. It's almost as if Watashi is a biased and unreliable narrator. However, the climactic scenes of episodes 1, 5, 9, and 11 all see the culmination of Ozu drawing the ire of almost every student organization at Kyoto University, so this does prove he does have some sort of mischievous streak. He has split up couples within the tennis club and other circles as part of the Black Cupids. He made an expose film on Jougasaki angering him and his cronies in the Nosogi Film Circle. He made another expose film on Aijima angering him and his cronies at the Lucky Cat Restaurant, and he's climbed the ranks in a hostile takeover of the Lucky Cat Restaurant under only making a few enemies in the process, collecting library fees, setting fire to their print shop reports, and stealing many bikes and even a plane. And finally, he's stolen the entire airship from the Honwaka Corporation. And why? What was it all for? Was it simply to make the story a little more interesting, to have fun by partaking in life's absurdities? While some goals like intentionally splitting up couples or stealing bikes are a bit more mean-spirited, and I can't quite explain other than that we already know that Watashi is not the most reliable narrator in terms of describing Ozu. What we do know about Ozu is that he stole the airship because he was in love with Kohinata. The most beautiful revelation of Tatami Galaxy is that Ozu was never a yokai hell-bent on a conspiracy to undermine Watashi's life. Ozu instead has always been a much simpler and more normal character, with only the purest and most innocent goal: impressing his girlfriend. Ozu has arguably been put in the exact same parameters as Watashi upon entering college life. They were both remarkably intelligent yet layabout guys who participated in many of the same clubs. They would always be naturally inclined towards each other, as unlike other club members, only they could comprehend each other, even to the other's chagrin. They had the same friends, the same master, the same diet, the same physical build, and heck, I wouldn't even be surprised if Ozu also had his own 4.5 tatami room. And yet, Ozu does not regret his past 2 years in university. Ozu, unlike Watashi, is happy. And Ozu has a girl. And what girl does Watashi have? There was a second author behind Keiko Higuchi's identity, as it wasn't just Ozu, it was also Akashi. It's revealed that while Ozu was involved in the writing of the letters in the beginning, he later grew bored of it and it was only Akashi who resumed the correspondence with Watashi. And I thought this was one of the most adorable moments of the series, as it implies that underlying feelings in the letters on both sides were actually genuine. Akashi saw through Watashi's lies while lying herself, and nevertheless accepted him as he was. Akashi goes on to thank Watashi for saving her at the superhero club earlier, and to me, this was one of the most touching and unique confession scenes I've ever watched. And yet Watashi stands her up? He goes straight home, and what is wrong with this guy? He goes straight home, denying to himself that Akashi actually liked him. He tells himself that she just liked the false veneer of himself written in his letters, that she just liked the Mochiguman suit surrounding him, and that she could not possibly like who he was underneath. Watashi has become so entrenched in his self-despising that he has projected his pitiful perceptions of himself onto others. But hold on a minute, Mochiguman? What are these oddly shaped, vaguely teddy bear-looking things? In almost every episode, Watashi will see a moth fluttering about a Mochiguman keychain, and be reminded of a flashback where the normally composed Akashi will suddenly freak out at the sight of a moth.
かしもうかれこれ1年以上前の話だ。
明石さんがなくしたっていうもんだから足取りを追うのに苦労しました。まるで誰かに拾われるのを求めてさまよってたみたいに。
みたいです。
落ち着きない。
すみません。ミツバチが減ると困ります。蛾が増えてしまいますから。
And reasonably so, because moths are some of the most disgusting creatures in the world. Which might explain why Watashi almost self-identifies with these almost universally hated creatures. Because when Watashi is lost roaming through the 4.5 tatami rooms, each tatami room also has a moth that is also stuck in the room, grasping futilely at the light. Perhaps like Icarus. Or maybe that's a stretch. Anyways, after Akashi freaks out over the moth, Watashi will notice the keychain of Mochiguman's by her side, after which Akashi will tell him about it.
これはモチグマンといって5匹で一揃いなのですが、1匹なくしてしまって。
心配するな。どうせ地球は丸いのだ。いつかまた会える。なんなら私が探してあげてもいい。
それより猫ラーメンに連れて行ってください。実現させてください。
そんなことなら。
約束ですよ。約束ですよ。
私が見たものは明石さんがぶら下げていたモチグマンである。5匹で一揃いなのを1匹なくしてしまったらしい。それは明石さんがかつてなくしたと言っていたモチグマンであった。5匹で一揃いなのを1匹なくしてしまったらしい。なくしたモチグマンを探していると言っていた。
これは5人組なのですが、1匹なくしてしまって。モチグマンは本当に好きなのです。5匹揃ってモチグマンというのですが、あれ、1匹いない。
そういえば転げた拍子に何か飛んでいったような。
いえ、危ないですから大丈夫です。
しかし
昔から探さなくてもなぜだか必ず戻ってきますので。
それは何ですか？
これはモチグマです。5匹揃ってモチグマンというのです。1匹なくしてしまったのですが。
Akashi has a keychain at Mochigumans that come in sets of 5, but she's missing 1. And Watashi will always pledge to one day find the missing Mochiguman, and this promise is also always in conjunction with another promise, such as finishing a romance film or taking her to the Neko Ramen cart. And later in present day, Akashi will tell Watashi to not forget his promise. But something tells me she's less concerned with her own missing Mochiguman, and that she is instead looking forward more to Watashi taking her to the Neko Ramen cart, to finishing his romance film. She wants Watashi to live his life well and to follow his passions, and to do so with his characteristic conviction and not be dissatisfied with his choices. And so, will Watashi be able to follow through? Will he be able to fulfill his promise? Let us go back to the very first episode where Watashi fails to confess to Akashi and subsequently thrown off the bridge. To the moment when time came to a standstill as he lay suspended over the river's dangerous waters, reminiscing on all his life choices over the past years that led him to this moment. Will he go on to live well and learn to appreciate the fullness of life's absurdities and wonders? Or will he once again regress, live with regret, turn back time and over again until he no longer has the will to turn back any further, become a despondent, give up on trying, and walk his life as now ever unchanging? You ever feel like you want to shut yourself off from the rest of the world? Like, you're tired of being disappointed by the outside world, and you're afraid of being disappointed again. Because it hurts when you set expectations but fail to meet them. And then you fail to meet those expectations again and again. Wouldn't it be nicer if those expectations were never set in the first place? What if you could just disappear into a world where nobody else existed? No people means no expectations, which means no failures, which means no disappointment. And it's not like anyone would miss you. Nobody will ever love you. How could anybody love someone so consistently fraught with failure? You'll never be enough for that girl. You'll never be enough for anybody. You do the world a favor by leaving. You could spend every day eating only fried foods, making your body worse, but you can ignore it. Ignoring your problems only let them get worse. But if you don't care about yourself, it doesn't matter. Let your assignments continue to go undone. Stay in bed all day and don't eat. Or overeat. Stay inside all day. Don't talk to anyone. Don't make any meaningful connections. As people will only end up disappointing you, or you will end up disappointing them. Just like how you disappoint yourself. You can't control other people. You can control whether or not they will hurt you, and most likely they'll hurt you. You can't trust other people. You must build an impenetrable wall between yourselves and other people. The only person you can control is yourself. So it's better to exist in a world where only you exist, and for the rest of the world to exist without you. You deserve to live a life of eternal solitude in a world without love because you are a pathetic loser who can't even do the tiniest things, and you don't even deserve to exist. This, to me, is the Tatami Galaxy. An endless cycle of hopelessness that only gets worse and worse and worse. It's a pattern of thinking that once you get caught in it, you'll feel hopelessly trapped, and you'll feel hopelessly, terribly alone. This is exactly what depression feels like, and it's what can happen when you become so frustrated with what you perceive as failure, that you give in and let the failure consume you. And depression is very often a natural reaction to absurdity. Absurdity, by definition, is a state of events being perceived as irrational or wildly unreasonable. When things don't go how we want or expect, we can often feel powerless as a result, because just like how the world feels beyond our control, we feel like we don't have any control over our own lives. And in this state of powerlessness, it is very easy to succumb to our worst thoughts and eventually fall into depression. But maybe we should reassess what we perceive as irrational. What exactly do we think is being unfair? Not being able to meet a raven-haired maiden? Is that really unfair? A world with airships, poorly made student films, secret societies, sex dolls, miraculous tortoise brushes, cat ramen carts, Castella cakes, Mochiguman keychains, and glittery glowing fireworks. Is this world really so bad? Perhaps the world isn't as absurd as you think it is. Maybe the only thing that's really absurd is how you're looking at it. If one is wondering how to get out of the Tatami Galaxy or the overwhelming emotions associated with failure, an easy answer might be to simply not fail. Achieve the rose-colored campus life and boom, depression is over. Or maybe more helpfully, it might be better to reassess what you originally perceived to be as failure. Recognize that this pattern of thinking isn't healthy and you don't have to think this way. And it's okay that you become trapped. Even the brightest of minds can get trapped sometimes. And while this may not apply to all your problems, you can recognize that for some of the issues you face, the only person who created this endlessly repeating inner world is yourself. And thus the only person standing in your way is yourself. Not anyone else, and especially not Ozu. And you are more than capable of overcoming yourself. Watashi did not waste the past 2 years. His college life was filled with extraordinary events and characters with many memorable experiences, some good and some bad, which all helped enrich him into the person he is today. And you too. You're doing okay. In the climax of episode 11, Watashi bursts out of the Tatami Galaxy alongside a flurrying storm of moths. Each moth presumably represents a part of Watashi stuck in each of the 4.5 Tatami rooms, and all the moths simultaneously breaking out in a glorious rush symbolizes all of the Watashis finally breaking free of the endless cycle. And we finally see Watashi confront Ozu on the bridge. We finally understand that Ben is one true best friend, and the shocking reversal of roles. Because Ozu has never yet met Watashi in this timeline iteration, Watashi is determined to do unto Ozu what Ozu has done unto Watashi in all his previous lifetimes, and give Ozu the greatest, most extraordinary, multicolored campus life. And why?
僕たちの愛にしてくださいよ。そんな汚いものいりません。
And lastly, Watashi does take Akashi out to Nekarama at the end of the show. And how good was it? It was absurdly good.